Hey guys, welcome to today's Technique Tuesday. I'm going to be showing you how to make these twigs that do not have any wires, and you can use them for all kinds of nature inspired designs. They can be snapped and put together with some melted chocolate or melted candy melts. You can make bird nests, vines. I've got an example here of some like cherry blossoms, but these are actually made from wafer paper. Yes, you heard it right, wafer paper. So I'm going to show you how to make these. So what you're going to need some wafer paper, obviously. I use, this is a great way to use up your scraps of wafer paper. So you can cut strips with scissors, or you can rip strips of scraps. I use just cheap vodka and brown airbrush coloring. And then I've got a large shallow dish. And this is a heat gun. It's one of those air heat guns that you can buy in craft stores that you can use for embossing with stamp art, but I use it for this tutorial. But I'm going to show you a secondary method after this in case you don't have a heat gun. And actually the secondary method, truth be told, is faster and easier. It just gives you a little different look. So as you see, I just poured some of the vodka into the shallow dish. I'm not really measuring. And then I'm going to take my brown airbrush color and put a few drops in and just kind of mix that around in the vodka with my brush. You'll see in a little bit here that I actually needed to add a little bit more of the brown airbrush color to the vodka because I wasn't real happy with the first one that I did. I felt like it wasn't dark enough, but this is just kind of the beginning step here. So once I get the color mixed into the vodka, I'm just going to take a strip of wafer paper, and this is just plain old wafer paper, any old kind will work, and you're going to dip it into that vodka and color mix and just thoroughly saturate it. The reason you use vodka, if you use water, your wafer paper is just going to immediately melt. The vodka will help it keep its shape, but it's going to dry crispy. It's going to dry hard like a twig, which is what we're going for. So all I'm doing now is the wafer paper saturated, and I'm just going to start rolling it together into kind of like a long worm type shape. And then you'll see that I'm not only rolling it, but I'm also twisting it together. And it's going to be a twig, so it's not going to be perfectly straight. We want it to have a little bit of character, a little bit of shape. And you'll see the vodka makes the wafer paper kind of almost elastic. While it's still wet, it's a little rubbery. And here's that step that I just mentioned earlier where I felt like it was too light, so I just added a little bit more of the brown airbrush color to a brush and just kind of added it on by hand. But this is step one. So get it saturated with the vodka and the color, roll it and twist it together, and there we go. And again, you can see it's very elastic while it's wet. So the next thing we're going to need to do is heat it up. So I've got my heat gun that I mentioned, and then I also like to use a little tool to hold it still because the air will make it kind of go. But again, this is just one of those air heat guns that you can get at a craft store. I use the high setting when I do a single piece like this. You have to be careful because it's hot air. It gets hot, so don't burn yourself. But that's why I start kind of blowing it on there, and you can see it's making it move. And I believe I've sped up the film on this part because it takes a little bit of time, maybe a couple minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes of applying the heat to it. Here you can see I grabbed a little gum paste or fondant tool to kind of hold it still. You'll see in a minute, this is not my tool of choice to hold it. I have a different tool I'm going to grab here in a second that you'll see. This one, I have no idea what this tool is called, but it has a kind of a needle point on one end and then little scooper carving tool on the other. I believe it's for sculpting, but whatever it's called, I call it my pokey tool. But that's the best one to use for this, so I can just kind of hold it still. And I'm just getting that hot air gun pretty close, and as it heats up, it starts to kind of wiggle around and bubble up, and it starts to dry out and get it dries hard, it dries crispy. And so that's what we want because it's a twig. And the awesome thing about this technique is that you can attach flowers to it and have it climb up the side of a cake, but there's no wires in it, so you don't have to worry about wires. It's technically edible. I will tell you it doesn't taste very good. It's super crunchy, but a really cool effect. And as you can see, as I get that heat gun on there really closely, it just bubbles up and creates these almost like knots, which real twigs and vines and branches have in real life in nature. And so I really love just nature inspired things that, they don't have to be perfect. So which is why I just love this technique. I've never seen this technique done exactly like this before by anyone else, so I'm not totally sure if maybe somebody else out there has done it, but I just came across it accidentally one time and did it as a demo for icing images on one of their lives. And so I do use icing images wafer paper. So that was just one that I did with the heat gun. And as I mentioned, I decided it just wasn't quite dark enough. So as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit more of the airbrush color. You can use gel color also, but I just like using the airbrush. It's quicker and easier just to drop it in there. So this piece of wafer paper I'm dipping right now is obviously a scrap left over from a project that I used a paper punch to cut out circles. Save your wafer paper scraps, guys, because you can do all kinds of amazing things with it. So once this is dipped, I'm just gonna kind of roll it in on itself. I don't care that it's breaking apart a little bit in spots, because it's gonna give the final little twig, it's gonna give it some character and make it have a nice interesting look. So again, I'm just kind of twisting it together, getting it into a shape, into a long kind of worm-like shape that I can then, zap it again real quick with the heat gun. And so this one's just going to look a little different than the other one. As you can see, the first one I did ended up kind of snapping apart a little bit. It's okay. Again, if you're going to make like a bird's nest or any other kind of technique where you'd need a lot of like little pieces of twigs, this is certainly a way to do that. So again, I have my little pokey tool and I'm just holding it down and hitting it with that heat air gun again. And I've sped this up so you don't have to sit there and watch it for 3 full minutes, but you can see it just starts to bubble in spots and get really interesting shapes. So that piece is just about done. I think I hit it one more time here. It's kind of satisfying to watch it. It moves. It's moving not just because of the air blowing on it, but also because of the heat is causing that wafer paper to bubble in really interesting ways. I also feel like you could use this technique to make maybe like actual worms or bugs, or sometimes I feel like these look like pretzel sticks. I guess you could actually use pretzel sticks in a project, but you know, if you wanted to make it yourself. So now this is the next phase here where I'm going to show you a much quicker way to do a whole bunch of pieces at once. I've dipped a bunch of scraps and strips and placed them on a cookie sheet. Now I should have mentioned I'm using a silicone baking mat because it will stand up to the heat. You probably would not want to use parchment paper. I'm not sure if it would, I don't know what it would do actually. I've never tried it, but I always use my silicone baking mats for this. But I sped up the film a little bit here so you don't have to watch me roll each piece. But if you choose to do this method, we're going to take it over to the oven, and it's going to go in the oven under the broiler on high. And I have it, my oven rack is the second rack position down from the heating element, which is probably maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches. Maybe not that much, maybe 6 to 8 inches. But leave your oven door open. Do not walk away from this. You need to watch it the whole time. And I did speed up the film because it sat under the broiler for, it was about 3.5 minutes before I felt like it was ready to come out. It was starting to bubble in spots and really crisp up, but when it starts to smoke a little bit, you got to take it out and then you don't want to burn it. But it's just interesting, and like I said, the film is sped up, but it does different things in the oven under the broiler, under that dry heat that's not, you know, it's not a convection heat, it's just you know, direct heat from the element. But this is what they look like as the final phase. And so these turned out a little more straight with just a few little twists and turns, whereas the ones I did with the heat gun, the little air gun, have a little different look to them. But once they come out of the oven, this is what they look like. They're crispy, they're stiff. You can snap them into different sizes, and here's a few examples of what you can do with them. That was Cherry Blossom cake, and then this cake I used them on the Twigs.